Welcome everyone to this very, very interesting session that is the postgraduate work permit in Canada. And while a lot of you following us, maybe from India, from various other parts of the world, this is particularly useful for anyone who is in Canada pursuing a course, and especially if you are at the very fag end of your course, and if you are nearing completion, because the next step of your journey, of course, is going to be the postgraduate work permit. So let's take a step back and etch this journey from the very start of the process. So the first building block to this process is someone coming to Canada as an international student. So you got an offer from a designated learning institute. Please note that the word DLI is going to be recurrent in sort of my rhetoric today, because the word designated learning institute is very, very important. It is any institute that is approved by the federal and the provincial government to be able to provide that qualification to international students, right? So you got your offer of place, you submitted all of your documentation, you applied to the visa office, and you are now in Canada pursuing the course. It's all gone very well, and you are nearing completion. All right, so the automatic question is, what happens next? So the next step of the process is the postgraduate work permit. Now, what really is, the postgraduate work permit? So the postgraduate work permit is an open work permit. Okay, the important word here is it is an open work permit, and it allows you to work for any employer in Canada, anywhere in Canada, and for any duration. So it's not employer bound, nor is it province or territory bound, which means it gives you pretty much the freedom to work anywhere across the contours of Canada, and you can also work for any employer in Canada, which makes it a particularly lucrative proposition. And it is the government's way of saying, you've invested all of this time and energy and resources in acquiring a qualification in Canada. This is your golden opportunity to be able to get some sort of work experience. So students make use of this postgraduate work permit to gain valuable experience in Canada, because it also allows for a very easy study to reside pathway, which means you complete your studies, you gain work experience, and then you apply for residence. And the points that you get for studying in Canada and the points that you get for acquiring work experience in Canada is crucial, and it's going to slowly but surely build you your residence pathway in Canada. And that's why the postgraduate work permit is an important link right in the center, because it allows you to move from being just a temporary entrant, being a student, to possibly a permanent resident, if that is what you choose. But otherwise, if you choose to go back to your country of origin, and if you plan to use your qualification in other places and other countries, that's all well too. But if you wish to reside in Canada, this is a particularly useful link that will facilitate your pathway. Okay, now an important tip is that not all courses in Canada qualify for a postgraduate work permit. So it's very, very important that you check if your course does qualify. So when you're in the process of choosing a course in Canada, please make sure that your research is well and good, and that you choose a course that qualifies you for a postgraduate work permit. A lot of courses will qualify you at the end of that process for a postgraduate work permit. But if you're doing something like a short-term course that is less than 8 months, or you are doing English as second language, or if you're studying French as a second language course, or if your course has a very large part-time component in it, it will not grant you a postgraduate work permit to the very end. So an important sort of expert tip here is that you do the necessary research, and that makes sure that your course qualifies you for a postgraduate work permit well before you enroll to any university or college or the institute of your choice. All right, so that's a tip. Now, why is it that the postgraduate work permit is particularly favorable for students to acquire work experience in Canada? Now, I'm sure a lot of you might have heard the omnipresent sort of phrase in Canada, the labor market impact assessment, LMIA. So normally, if any employer were to grant any foreign worker employment in Canada, they would have to go through a very long drawn process known as a labor market impact assessment. So, which means that the employer in Canada will have to prove to the government that there was no permanent resident or citizen who was eligible enough to do that particular piece of work, and therefore they are justified in offering that employment to a foreign worker. Now, this is a long process, and it involves an agency in Canada known as ESDC, Employment and Social Development Canada. And this, it's not easy to get an LMI exception for employers in Canada to hire foreign workers. But the postgraduate work permit is an LMI exempt work permit, which means if an employer were to hire you, or if an employer were to hire someone on a postgraduate work permit, they would not have to go through this very long drawn LMI process, which is particularly lucrative for employers, and it incentivizes them to hire lots of people or lots of students on the postgraduate work permit. So once you've worked for about a year in Canada, you stand very, very comfortably to qualify for residence in Canada. And there are various residence pathways for people on postgraduate work permits, and they may very well qualify for it at the end of the process. There, you must have heard about the Canadian Experience class, the Federal Skilled Worker class, Federal Skilled Trade, even programs like provincial nomination program, especially if you've completed your studies and acquired work experience in a particular province. You might be particularly well suited to qualify for a provincial nomination certificate from that particular province. So it positions international students very, very well for the express entry pathway and for the various other programs under sort of the broad umbrella of express entry. So that is why international students love the postgraduate work permit, and it is their opportunity to move forward in their sort of residence aspiration or the residence dream, if that's what they choose. And majority of of students do come to Canada with the aspiration of wanting to actually settle down here. Okay, now the obvious next question is who qualifies for a postgraduate work permit? So anyone who is above 18 years of age and anyone who has completed their studies from an institution that was approved to provide that qualification, or a designated learning institute qualifies for a postgraduate work permit. Please make sure that you will have to have been enrolled as a full-time student to qualify for the postgraduate work permit. If there were part-time components to your course, the part-time component cannot have exceeded more than 50% of the entirety of the course. So these are important factors to keep in mind as far as who qualifies is concerned. So I will repeat that. You have to be above 18 years of age. You will have had to be a full-time student as a full-time student at a designated learning institute. If there were part-time components to your course, you have to make sure that it wasn't more than 50% that that of the time that you were away from the classroom environment. 50% of your course will have had to be in class for you to qualify for the postgraduate work permit. And once you complete your course, this is a very, very important point. And I guess there's a question around the application timeline. Once you complete your course, you have 180 days to apply for the postgraduate work permit. So within 6 months of completion of your course at a DLI, you have to apply for a postgraduate work permit. So this isn't one of those things where you complete your study and the college administrative department comes and says, here's your postgraduate work permit. You have to indeed apply to IRCC for a postgraduate work permit, and you have up to 6 months to apply after you have received a certificate from your college or from your institute confirming that you have indeed completed the course that you set out to do. So 180 days is the important timeline to remember, to highlight, to always keep in mind. Now, a lot of you might ask, okay, so I have completed my course. The college is taking a little bit of time to give me my certificate and to hand me my, completion letter or a convocation certificate, or whatever it is that is granted at the end of completion of that qualification. You might ask, do I have to stay in Canada to apply for the postgraduate work permit? And that is an interesting question indeed. The answer to that is you do not have to stay on in Canada. You can very well leave Canada and go to your country of origin. So if you were a student from India, you could travel back to India until your certificates were issued or are granted to you, and you can actually apply for a postgraduate work permit from overseas. Kindly note, this is a new development. Earlier, you had to be in Canada to apply for a postgraduate work permit, which means um, anyone in any other country could not apply. You had to have been in Canada on valid status to have applied for the postgraduate work permit. There have been amendments since, and you can actually apply for your postgraduate work permit from your country of origin or from overseas. So in that case, you would apply to your visa office in that particular country. So you would apply to, say, for example, the Canadian consulate in New Delhi if you were in India, and you would provide a whole lot of additional documentation, which means that if you were in Canada, perhaps the requirements with documents wouldn't be as exhaustive as it would be if you were in some other country. So if you were applying from India, from any other country, you would have to meet the documentation requirements for that particular country, which can be a little bit more elaborate and exhaustive compared to if you were in Canada. Okay, but the important update is that you can actually apply from within Canada. Okay, I think on one of the platforms, that was definitely the question around if I can apply from overseas or from in Canada. So I guess we have answered that question, that you can apply from whichever country you're in, from your country of origin. Guys, just a sec, I'm going to refocus this, okay? You can apply from your country of origin, but you just have to meet the additional documentation requirements. Okay, so that was about who qualifies for a postgraduate work permit. Now, I said you have 180 days, right, to apply for a postgraduate work permit. Now, what happens if while you're waiting to apply for a postgraduate work permit, while you're waiting for certificates from your institute, what happens if your study permit expires? And this is a fair enough question, because it might so happen that you are waiting for your convocation certificate or for your course completion certificate, and your study permit has expired because it was the dates were sort of extremely close to your course completion date. Now, please note that you cannot apply for a postgraduate work permit if you are not on any valid visa, which means your status will have to be valid for you to apply for a postgraduate work permit. So if you have an expired study permit, you will have to do what is known as restoration of status, which means you have to make yourself a legal temporary entrant first before you apply for the postgraduate work permit. So let me explain that, because there was a whole lot of sort of immigration jargon there. But if I was waiting for my certificates and to apply for a postgraduate work permit, but if my study permit expired, I would have to first apply for a valid visitor status in India. So I would apply for a visitor visa first and be on a valid temporary entry visa before I apply for a postgraduate work permit. I cannot apply for a postgraduate work permit when I'm not on any valid visa. That is the bottom line. Okay, so I hope that that point is clear. Yeah, there was a question around it as well, so we've addressed that. Now, the next sort of topic is, and a lot of you may be curious to know about, what are the eligibility factors for qualifying for a postgraduate work permit? As I said at the very start of this conversation, when you're doing your research and when you're choosing courses in Canada, please make sure that you're keeping in mind some very, very important, I would say, data points before you actually choose a course. you have to make sure that the course duration is a minimum of 8 months for you to qualify for a postgraduate work permit. Any course whose duration is less than 8 months will not grant you a postgraduate work permit. So it has to be more than 8 months. The other thing is you have to have studied in a DLI. It has to be an approved DLI, and you will have to have been largely a full-time student, right? Those are the factors that are important as far as eligibility criteria is concerned. How long does it take to process a postgraduate work permit? Now, the answer to that is it takes anywhere between 80 days to 180 days for processing. So, a note to all people who are pursuing a course in Canada, please make sure you apply for a postgraduate work permit well before the expiry of your study permit. Okay, if I tell you real time, at the moment, it's now taking 89 days to process a postgraduate work permit application. The easiest way to apply for a postgraduate work permit is to submit an online application, but kindly note you can also submit a paper-based application. In that case, you would be sending all of your documents, your entire file to Case Processing Center, and I guess Ottawa is the center that does all of the student-related processing work. So you would be sending your file to Ottawa, and then they would process that physical file. So the processing timeframes for online as well as physical applications at the moment, and I'm giving you real-time information, is about 89 days. But as far as processing time is concerned, it can take anywhere between 80 days to 180 days to process a postgraduate work permit application. So please make sure that you are applying well in advance and you're not waiting until the very, very last moment, or you're not waiting until you get all of your required documentation to actually start the process, right? Start the process in advance, create your profile, etc. Online, and be ready. And as soon as you get your course completion certificate from the institute, you can apply for a postgraduate work permit. Now, I guess there is I've seen sort of a bit of a question around the time frames. Okay, so there was an important question around while your postgraduate work permit is being processed, are you allowed to work? Yes or no? Now, the important answer to this question is yes. While your postgraduate work permit application is being processed by IRCC, you can actually work full-time. So that is another advantage of being an early bird as far as the application is concerned, because while your application is being processed, you can actually start work and you can actually start working full-time. So the moment you receive your course completion certificate, it would be ideal if you started the process of applying for a postgraduate work permit. And the moment you receive acknowledgement from IRCC that your application has been received, you can start working. You basically have the legal validity to start working in Canada. Okay, that is another important point. And we've discussed the important development that now the government actually allows you to apply for a postgraduate work permit from overseas. It was exclusively an in-Canada application process that was mandated earlier, but now you can apply for a postgraduate work permit from anywhere in the world. You have to apply to the visa office of your particular country or your particular territory or jurisdiction, and you have to meet all of the documentary requirements for that particular country, which might be exhaustive, but it isn't something that you will not be able to provide, because you should have all of the necessary documents from your institute and from your DLI. It shouldn't be too difficult to get. So the luxury now is that you can apply from anywhere in the world, or you can apply for your postgraduate work permit from overseas. Now, another sort of important question can be, can I apply for a work permit can I apply for another work permit after my postgraduate work permit has expired? And the answer to that is yes. If you get another employer in Canada, or if that same employer where you were working on a postgraduate work permit wants to continue to hire you, you can, of course, continue to work, and you can get an LMI exempt work permit, or the employer might choose to go through the rigors of the LMI process and grant you an offer at the end of that process. So you can very, very well qualify for other work permits after your postgraduate work permit. But of course, a particularly aspirational route and one that all international students would be rather keen to take advantage of is applying for residence at the end of that process. So as I said already, qualification in Canada as well as work experience in Canada is going to give you additional points if you are going to apply under express entry, which is, of course, the most express way of getting residence in Canada. So if you want to apply via the express entry program at the end of your postgraduate work permit stint, you stand very, very well positioned, because you would have gotten added qualification in Canada, and you will get significant points for it, and you will also get points for additional work experience in Canada. All right, question. So the interesting question, of course, because I have mentioned points, I guess the obvious next question would be, how many points really do you get in the express entry system if you have studied in Canada and if you have acquired at least a year's work experience? And that is a valid, interesting question. You get now. If I were to step back a little bit and give you context about the express entry process, the express entry process was started in 2015 to bring sort of the most skilled immigrants from around the world, the sort of creme de la creme, if I were to call it that, of immigration hopefuls or migrants from the rest of the world to Canada. So it is a point-based system, and you get points for many, profile characteristics. So, for example, age, work experience, qualification, English language ability, family in Canada, adaptability. There are a whole lot of factors that will give you points that will bolster your ultimate CRS points, based on which you either qualify when the government pulls a draw or not. Okay, so for studying in Canada, you will get additional points. So you will get about 15 points if you have done a 1 or a 2-year diploma or a certificate course, and you will get 30 points if you have done a degree or a master's degree course. So a degree course of at least 3 years or a master's degree course of at least a year will give you 30 additional points in the express entry system. And of course, for work experience in Canada, you will get additional points as well, ranging from 50 to 200, depending on what kind of employment. If it's skilled, highly skilled, if it was, depending on where it was pegged, if it was an executive, level job, or if it was a professional job, etc., the points will vary. But people who've studied in Canada and gained at least a year of work experience, they can stand reasonably assured that their residence pathway via the express entry program will be relatively easier, a lot easier compared to if you had no experience or if you had no Canadian qualification. So it is a very facilitative process to that effect. Okay. Let me check on other platforms if there are any questions. There are lots of questions that are not necessarily related to that are not necessarily related to the session. I see a lot of questions on New Zealand, the border situation, and when New Zealand is likely to open their borders. We will definitely have a New Zealand expert address New Zealand's border situation. At the moment, it doesn't look like there will be much traction or movement of people. Especially in the New Zealand context, but I'm of course not the New Zealand expert or the specialist, and we will have someone provide. But I see a whole lot of questions on the New Zealand border situation. On Canada, the border situation in Canada, you can travel to Canada if you have an approved study permit. That is the first regulation to keep in mind. If you have an approved study permit, if you have COVID negative symptoms, so you will require a COVID test at the time of boarding your flight. So if you have an approved study permit, and if your DLI, or if your designated learning institute, has a COVID readiness plan that was approved by the province, then you are basically good to come to Canada. And once you are here, you will, of course, have to adhere to the quarantine requirements. So you will have to find yourself a place to quarantine. You will have to stick to all of the provincial regulations as far as the quarantine is concerned, and you will also have to download an app and provide your information. So that is the situation as far as Canada is concerned, that there are no restrictions on travel as long as you have a valid study permit and as long as your DLI or your institute or college has a COVID readiness plan that was approved by the province. Now, if you're confused about whether your particular institute has a plan that was approved or not, please go to the Government of Canada website, and all of the institutes that have their COVID readiness plan approved, that list is available on that particular website, and then you can check. But that might be a little bit of a contrast to the New Zealand situation, because as far as Canada is concerned, you can actually travel if you have an approved permit, and if the COVID plan of your institute is approved. And once you are here, of course, there are the sort of regular quarantine requirements and rules, and there are also other provincial mandates that you might have to stick to once you're here. Okay, skimming through questions again. Somebody's asking me if I'm in Canada or New Zealand. For many of you who missed my introduction, I am the AJV specialist. I'm the licensed advisor for AJV for Canada, and I am not a New Zealand expert, even though AJB does specialize in the New Zealand market. But I am a Canada specialist, and I am based out of Toronto in Canada. And I am currently speaking from Toronto in Canada. It's a cold, dreary sort of winter day, and I am not in New Zealand. I am in Canada, if that was the confusion. I am in Toronto in Canada. Okay, so there are a lot of questions on New Zealand, New Zealand study, work visa, etc. We will have the team clarify that, but this particular live stream is for Canada, and it is on the postgraduate work permit. Okay, so moving on. The next, of course, is how many times can you apply for the postgraduate work permit? There was a question around this as well. It's an interesting question. How many times can you apply for the postgraduate work permit? And the answer to this is once. You can only apply and qualify for the postgraduate work permit once, which means there is no sort of recurrent applying, because this is the government's way of saying, here's your opportunity and here's your currency to work, try and find employment. So it's a one-time opportunity, and therefore you have to be very strategic while applying for the postgraduate work permit. Because if you are doing more than one course in Canada, and please keep this in mind, this is a really important expert tip. If you're doing more than one course in Canada, please apply for the postgraduate work permit after the completion of the longer duration course, because your postgraduate work permit will mirror the duration of that longer course. Okay, so if you're doing one course followed by another course, if you're doing a diploma followed by a degree, please apply for a postgraduate work permit at the end of that degree, because you will have a longer postgraduate work permit. Okay. Okay, so my colleague has forwarded a pertinent question here. So somebody wanting to apply for a master's degree, sorry, it's a bit of a segue because it's not immediately related to the postgraduate work permit, but this is someone applying for a master's along with a dependent, along with spouse and dependent child. And the question is, is it possible to apply all along? Can all applications be submitted together? And of course, the answer to that is yes. You can all apply together. So when the student application is being submitted to that particular visa office, and I think this particular case is India specific. So if I were applying for my study permit to the New Delhi visa office, the spousal application and the dependent child will all be will be applicants, and therefore it will accompany the student's application. But kindly note, these applications take much longer to process, because of course there are added elements to assess here, right? There is the element of the spousal relationship, then there is the dependent child parent relationship that has to be established. And because there are added facets to the assessment process, basically processing timeframes where there is a spouse, where there is a dependent child, or where there are children, in fact, the processing time frame will be longer, and therefore it's imperative that you apply well in advance, or that if you do not want the student to miss the course or whatever, it might in fact be wise for the student to apply first alone, and then for the spouse to apply subsequently once the student is in Canada and has started the course in Canada, because I do know of cases where there's been a significant delay because of a spousal and a dependent child application that was accompanying the primary applicant or the student. So if the student wants to go on unhindered, and if if that's a simpler way of getting an approval on time, then there might be a bit of a bifurcation or a separation that might be needed, and the spouse might have to apply a little bit later in the process. But of course, as there are lots of families and lots of couples that apply together, and that of course is very much allowed, or it is very much a pathway or a process that is followed by many students. Okay, so I hope I've answered that. So before I move to the question, we were on the topic of how many times can you apply for a postgraduate work permit? And of course, the golden answer to that particular question is once only. So make sure you apply for the postgraduate work permit at the very end of your of your longer duration course, in case you are doing more than one course in Canada. Okay, now we've already discussed about the pathway to residence, which means you come to Canada as an international student, you study here, then you acquire work permit via the postgraduate work permit allowance, and then you move on to residence. And as far as residence is concerned, international students take advantage of this particular pathway that is known as CEC, or the Canadian Experience class. So it might be worthwhile for students in Canada already. Please make sure that you research this particular program or process for residents known as the Canadian Experience class. While there are a whole lot of requirements for this particular class, the one important qualifier is 12 months work experience in Canada. So as long as you have full-time paid work experience in Canada of up to 12 months, you qualify for residence under this particular program called Canadian Experience class. And of course, in addition to your 12 months experience, you have to have the requisite language scores, and all of the other important qualifying criteria. But the most important mandate under this program is that you need to have full-time paid work experience in Canada for at least 12 months. And for this 12-month work experience specification, please note that you cannot use the part-time work that you might have taken advantage of as a student. That work or that quantum of experience cannot be used to claim points under CEC. It has to be work that you have gained under the postgraduate work permit. So that is why the postgraduate work permit is an important link between your temporary stay to residence, which could be the goal for many students who come to Canada. So Canadian Experience Class is the one residence program that international students take advantage of. Fun fact, in 2019, I guess supposedly about 58,000 students took advantage of the Canadian Experience Class residence program. So yeah, 58,000 students, not Canadian Experience Class in particular, but 58,000 students applied for residence in 2019. So that's a really large subset of people applying for residence, and these are all students who had acquired work experience by way of the postgraduate work permit allowance. Okay, so yeah, so that was the study to reside pathway. Okay, now we move on to some sort of recent announcements. Okay, before that, there's actually an important question on how do you restore your status if while waiting for your certificates, or if before applying for the postgraduate work permit, if your student visa has expired, what do you do? So whenever your visa or the currency of the permit that you were on expires, you have to undergo what is known as the restoration process. Now, visa restoration is an important immigration function. It is allowed under Section 182 of the Immigration Refugee Protection Regulation, IRPR. You don't have to know all of this, but what it means is that if it's been 90 days or less since your visa expired, you can apply for restoration of the status. So if you were a student and your visa expired and it hasn't been more than 90 days since your study visa expired, you can apply for restoration. So when you're applying for restoration, you can apply for the same visa or a visa that is, say, for example, a level down. So if I were a student, I would apply for a restoration of my student visa, or I would apply for restoration as a visitor. You cannot go one up and apply for restoration as a worker. Okay, if there were, a sort of a hierarchy or a pyramid or a grid of permits and visas, when you are applying for restoration, you can only restore to the same visa type, or almost level down, if I were to say. So please make sure that you note all of your visa deadlines and timings very, very closely, because sometimes just students don't check enough, or they're not even cognizant of the fact that their study permit or their visa has expired already. So make sure you track all of your expiry dates, because if you have missed the 90-day deadline, you basically have to leave Canada. You're not even eligible for restoration of your status because you've stayed as an illegal temporary entrant for too long. So the 90-day benchmark set by the government is a very, very important one, because after that, basically, you are liable to be deported. You cannot stay on in Canada. So the 90-day restoration timeline is an important one to note. And for anyone who is in Canada on a temporary entry visa, make sure you're tracking, all of your deadlines, and make sure you're applying for subsequent visas well in advance. COVID, especially, has seen protracted processing times, so you have to apply well in advance. We will now come to some of the recent announcements. And before I go to student-specific announcements, on YouTube, I think there were a whole lot of questions on, can people travel? Okay, when can people travel to Canada? So if you are a student, if you are a worker, if you have approved Canadian residency, you can actually travel to Canada. So you have to have your approved permit. So you have to have your approved study permit, your approved work permit. In case of residence, you have to have a confirmation of permanent residence. With all of these travel documents, you can actually travel to Canada. You, of course, have to be COVID negative at the time of boarding your flight. And once you come to Canada, you have to quarantine for 14 days, download the CAN app, provide all of your information adhere to guidelines as mandated by provinces. So you can actually travel to Canada if you have an approved permit. Okay, so having said that, I will go back to the postgraduate work permit or students and general announcements. So in August of 2020, the government announced that um, as long as 50% of your classes were done in Canada, the other 50% could be done anywhere. So you could actually study online. And the government said you can continue to study online in your country of origin or wherever you are continuously until the 30th of April 2021. You can continuously study online. And then as long as the remaining half of your course is in class in Canada, you will qualify for the postgraduate work permit. If your course duration was between 8 months to 12 months, so if it was a short course between 8 months to 12 months, um, and your course started between May to September 2020. Okay, so if it was a short duration course, which is 8 months to 12 months, and if your start date was between May to September 2020, even if you did your entire course online, you qualified for a postgraduate work permit. Important announcement. This was made sometime around August 2020. So for shorter duration courses that started after between May to September 2020, you could basically do all of your course online in India or wherever, and you could still qualify for a postgraduate work permit. The other sort of important announcement that was made by the government came in Jan of 2021 with regard to the postgraduate work permit. And that was, it's never happened before. The government decided that anyone whose work permit expired on or after January 2020. So anyone who was on a postgraduate work permit and that postgraduate work permit expired on or after Jan of 2020, they were basically given another work permit. They were given an open work permit with an 18 months extension. When I spoke to you guys earlier, I said you can apply for the postgraduate work permit only once. But this was an exception that the government made, and it was, I guess, COVID inspired. That anybody who was on a postgraduate work permit that expired on or after Jan 2020, they received another open work permit that allowed them to stay on in Canada for an additional 18 months. This is huge. And this is, I guess, a part of the government's facilitative approach and facilitative move to allow students to continue to find employment in Canada, because a lot of them did encounter a whole lot of difficulties given COVID and given how the job situation was genuinely hard and difficult. So the government recognized that, and in recognition of how difficult it was for international students to find work, they were given an extension of 18 months. And this is quite an exceptional announcement because all this while you only had an opportunity to work after you've studied once. But this was an 18 months extension, largely because of COVID. And it's going to help a lot of international students who found it difficult to find work, full-time work in Canada after their studies. It's going to allow them to stay on, reach as many employers and continue their aspirational journey of finding work in Canada and gaining residence, perhaps. So these were the important government announcements as far as students were concerned. But in general, Canada is allowing migrants to come in as long as you have an approved permit. So as long as you have an approved study permit, a work permit, a confirmation of permanent residence, and as long as you are COVID negative and you have submitted your COVID negative results at the time of boarding the flight, you are allowed to come to Canada. And then, of course, there is the mandatory quarantine regulations, and there is the need to adhere to all of the provincial mandates. Okay, so that was about the postgraduate work permit. I hope this was helpful. There's quite a lot of information, and as I said at the very start of the video, this is particularly helpful for people who are in Canada already, pursuing their courses or at the fag end of their course, because this is important information about what to do next. and being proactive enough to put in your postgraduate work permit. You have 180 days to apply from the time of course completion, but the earlier you initiate the process, the better it is. Processing timeframes at the moment are about 89 days, so it'll still take about 3 months for IRCC to grant an approval once you put in your application. So please factor in this particular processing time when you put in your postgraduate work permit application. And if you are applying from overseas, if you're applying for a postgraduate work permit from India, etc., make sure in addition to your course completion letter, certificates from institutes, you are following the document checklist of that particular country, because visa offices in different countries have a very specialized, exclusive list for different parts of the world, and India in particular. I know that there is an India-specific checklist that is fairly exhaustive, and in addition to all of your institute certificates, etc., you will need to meet all of the additional documentary requirements. All right, I am doing a peripheral skim of questions. Yeah, as I said, there are quite a few. Okay, a lot of people asking, when can I connect to discuss? So, okay, so guys, I would be really grateful if you could, for anyone sort of wanting to connect with us and delve into, um, you know, opportunities in Canada, or if you guys are looking at, how can I go to Canada as a student? How can I take advantage of some of the residence programs? And if you want to work with us, please leave your number and your email ID in particular. You could do that in the comment section as well, and I will have someone in my team reach out. I'm, of course, a licensed advisor based in Toronto, so I will have an overview of all client files if you choose to work with us in the Canada process. So we, of course, have a whole group of specialists as far as the New Zealand process is concerned as well. AJV is also active in Australia. So quite a few destinations to choose from. If you want to connect with my team with regard to any of these destinations, I would request you to leave behind your email ID or your contact details, and I will have my team get back to you with how we can proceed. If anybody is watching this from Canada, and if you are at the fag end of your course, and if and if all of this is very intimidating, and if you're wondering, how can I get professional help to apply for my postgraduate work permit, or to tell me, how best to do this, please reach out to me. I am more than happy to be a part of your, journey as you, navigate subsequent visa pathways. Please leave your contact details, and I can get in touch with you to make the postgraduate work permit application process an easy and facilitative one. It is all of this is a little bit knowledge intensive, but as long as you work with a professional in the field, it's all going to be, the information is going to be given to you in small, very easily digestible bits. So don't worry, we can work together. Please leave your contact details below for me or my team to get back to you. And if you have any questions in particular to the postgraduate work permit or pathways, or any government announcement related queries, questions, or something that you're curious about, you can put it in the comment section now. And we can have, thank you. A lot of people are leaving their email IDs behind, so we will definitely be connecting with you on the IDs that you have provided. I will check other platforms for possible questions as well. Okay, so that was the postgraduate work permit and the associated details, guys. I will be back in my next session, we will discuss about, possibly residence pathways, or, we can also do a work-specific session. But do keep joining us as we come forth with more information that is likely to make your immigration aspiration or your immigration dream that much more achievable. And I will be more than happy to work with, anyone who is interested in pursuing their Canada dream or their journey. So thank you for your time tonight. For people who've joined me from different parts of the world, thank you. And I hope to connect with you guys soon enough again. Okay, if you have questions, please continue to engage with us via email, or you can leave your contact details and we will get in touch with you. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and have a good rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.